The entire galaxy went silent. Across more than 400 star systems, every screen lit up with the same image. Every alien race, every Galactic Council delegate, every crew member on every drifting space station, all of them watching the same thing. One broadcast, live, the official execution chamber of the Galactic High Court. And standing in the center of that chamber, wrists bound, chin raised, back straight, was a human. His name was Marcus Vale, Earth's peace ambassador, the man who had spent his entire life fighting for one single thing: that there would be no more wars, that no more mothers would bury their children, that no more planets would be reduced to ash and silence. And today, that same man was going to be killed in front of the entire galaxy. The Kreth Dominion's chief executor stepped forward. His voice was mechanical, hollow, stripped of anything resembling emotion, like a machine reading a shopping list. Marcus Vale, representative of Earth, convicted of unauthorized entry into classified Dominion territory during the Galactic Peace Summit. Sentence, death by dissolution. Marcus said nothing. He simply looked up, like he was staring at something beyond the ceiling, beyond the stars, like he was talking to someone who wasn't in that room, like he was saying goodbye to someone very specific. And then the light took him, thousands of light years away, in a small, dark room with no decorations and no windows. A man sat watching that same broadcast. His hands were completely still. His jaw was set like iron, his eyes absolute stone. When the final moment came across the screen, he stood up, slowly. He reached out and turned the screen off. No words, no sound, no expression. Then he picked up his communicator and dialed a frequency that only 3 people in the entire galaxy possessed. When his voice came, it wasn't grief, it was fire. General Damon Vale, authorization code, Eclipse 7 Omega. Contact the War Council immediately. Tell them I'm coming home. A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. And tell them, this time, I'm not bringing a peace treaty. This was the man the Kreth Dominion knew nothing about. They knew Marcus Vale, the diplomat, the dreamer, the face of humanity's hope. But they did not know Damon Vale. Marcus was humanity's voice. Damon was humanity's consequence. And when someone silences a voice, the consequence does not stay quiet. The galaxy believed that by executing one man, they had closed a chapter. They had no idea. They had just written the opening line of something far worse. They had no idea that the man whose twin they just killed had spent his entire life mastering one single discipline: war. And that war was about to begin. Before we talk about the war, we need to talk about the boys. Because you cannot understand what Damon Vale was about to unleash on the galaxy until you understand where he came from. Until you understand who Marcus was to him. Not as an ambassador, not as a symbol, but as a brother. They were born on a Tuesday morning in New Calcutta, Earth, 37 years before the galaxy would speak their name in fear. Their mother, Sarah Vale, was a field medic who had survived the Third Outer Colony War. She had seen what weapons did to human bodies. She had held dying soldiers in her arms on planets that didn't even have names yet, just coordinates, just numbers on a map that no one back home cared about. She raised her sons with one rule: you could be anything, but you must stand for something. Marcus stood for peace. From the time he could speak, he was the one who stopped playground fights, who talked down angry neighbors, who believed, truly, deeply believed, that every conflict had a conversation hiding inside it, that if you just found the right words, you could stop anything. Damon stood for something else entirely. He was quieter, harder. Where Marcus saw people, Damon saw systems. Where Marcus heard words, Damon heard strategy. By 17, he had already memorized every major galactic military engagement in recorded history. By 20, he had rewritten 3 of them on paper, showing exactly where the losing side went wrong. His instructors at the Earth Military Academy didn't know whether to be impressed or unsettled. They chose both. The twins were opposites in every visible way. Marcus was warmth, the kind of person a room turned toward, like plants turning towards sunlight. Damon was gravity, silent, invisible, but everything orbited around him whether it wanted to or not. But between them, between just the 2 of them, there was something the galaxy would never understand. A language with no words. A single look across a room that communicated entire conversations. A hand on a shoulder that said, I know, without a single syllable. A bond so deep it didn't feel like brotherhood anymore. It felt like one soul that had simply decided, at birth, to walk in 2 different directions just to cover more ground. And that was the moment everything changed. The day Marcus was elected as Earth's first official peace ambassador to Galactic High Council. Damon didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He pulled his brother aside, away from the cameras, away from the press, away from the noise, and he said just 4 words: come back to me. Marcus had laughed. He had gripped his brother's shoulder, looked him dead in the eye, and said, I always do. He didn't. And somewhere in the cold silence of deep space, General Damonvale was now carrying those 4 words like a wound that would never close, and turning them, slowly, into the most dangerous military strategy the galaxy had ever seen. Earth's War Council met in a room that didn't officially exist. No coordinates in any public database. No windows. No recording devices. Just 12 of the most powerful military minds humanity had ever produced, sitting around a table made of steel salvage from the wreckage of the first Kreth border skirmish. A reminder, a scar worn proudly. They had been expecting grief. When the doors opened and Damonvale walked in, they got something far more unsettling. He looked rested, focused. His uniform was pressed. His eyes were clear. There was no redness, no swelling, no trembling hands. Nothing that said my brother just died in front of 400 star systems. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace. The kind that comes from a decision already made. He sat down. He placed a single data drive in the center of the table. He looked at every face in that room, one by one, slowly, and then he spoke. I am not here to mourn. I am here to work. Everything you need is on that drive. Read it completely before you say a single word to me. The silence that followed the reading lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes where 12 of humanity's greatest military strategists sat completely motionless. Some leaning forward, some leaning back, some of their hands pressed flat against the table like they needed to feel something solid beneath them. Then, one by one, 3 of them stood up. They didn't argue. They didn't shout. They simply placed their council badges on the table and walked out, resigned, quietly, like men who had just read something they couldn't carry. The document was called the Veil Doctrine, and what was in it wasn't a battle plan, not in any traditional sense. There were no fleet formations, no weapon specifications, no territorial objectives. What Damon had written was something far more ancient and far more terrifying. A psychological demolition blueprint. He didn't plan to defeat the Kreth Dominion by outgunning them. He knew humanity couldn't. Not yet. Their fleets were larger, their weapons more advanced, their armor generations ahead of anything Earth currently fielded. A direct confrontation would be a massacre, so Damon had no intention of fighting them directly. His plan was to make them destroy themselves. Every page of the doctrine was built on one foundational truth that Damon had spent 20 years studying. The Kreth Dominion was powerful, yes, but it was also brittle, held together not by loyalty, but by fear, not by unity, but by dominance. Every subject planet, every allied species, every Kreth military commander, they didn't follow the Dominion because they believed in it. They followed it because they were terrified of what happened to those who didn't. Marcus had known this too. He had tried to use it diplomatically. Damon was going to use it as a weapon. The plan had 5 stages. The council members who remained read all 5. By stage 3, 2 of them had stopped breathing normally. By stage 4, the room temperature felt 10 degrees colder. And stage 5 didn't have a title. It just had a single line of text at the top of the page. If we reach this stage, the Kreth Dominion will not be defeated. It will cease to exist entirely. Authorized only if all other stages fail. The council looked at Damon. Damon looked back. I want full authorization, he said quietly, for all 5 stages. Today. And that was the moment humanity stopped being the victim and became something the galaxy had never encountered before. Not a military force. Not a resistance movement. A reckoning. Clapperboard Part 4, The Galaxy Laughs. English. 500 words, cinematic narration. 3 days after the War Council meeting, the Kreth Dominion made a broadcast of their own. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a formal diplomatic communication. It was something far more insulting than any of those things. It was a laugh. Admiral Voss Crane, Supreme Commander of the Kreth Dominion's 7th Expansion Fleet, decorated with 30 years of conquest across 19 star systems, sat in a command throne and addressed the entire galaxy with the casual confidence of a man who had never once considered the possibility of losing. His translator AI rendered his words into every known language simultaneously. We have received word that Earth's War Council has authorized a military response to the lawful execution of their criminal representative. We welcome it. We have cataloged Earth's current fleet strength, weapon technology, and tactical capability. Our conclusion: send your ships. We could use the target practice. The galaxy reacted exactly as he intended. Laughter, mockery, thousands of alien news networks running side-by-side comparisons. Kreth Dominion warships next to Earth's finest vessels. The difference was not subtle. Kreth dreadnoughts were the size of small moons. Their hull plating alone could absorb firepower that would vaporize an entire human destroyer squadron. Their weapons fired at ranges where human sensors couldn't even confirm a target existed. On paper, it wasn't a war. It was an execution scheduled slightly later than the first one. Every major galactic power expected one of 2 responses from humanity. Either a desperate, emotional charge, grief-fueled and suicidal, The kind of attack that gets remembered as tragically brave and completely pointless. Or a quiet retreat, a swallowing of pride, a humanity that learned its place in the galactic order and sat down. What they got was silence. Complete, total, absolute silence. No press conferences, no counter-broadcasts, no fleet movements detected on any crest sensor array, no diplomatic communications, no threats, no posturing, nothing. For 17 days, Earth said absolutely nothing. And that silence, that specific, deliberate, suffocating silence, was the first move of the Veil Doctrine, because Damon understood something about powerful enemies that most military strategists miss entirely. When you scream back at them, you confirm their model of you become predictable, you become readable, you become something their war AIs can calculate and counter within seconds. But when you go silent, you become unknown. And unknown, to a military machine built entirely on cataloging and categorizing threats, is the most destabilizing thing imaginable. Admiral Crane ran his threat assessment systems continuously for those 17 days, every hour, searching for fleet movements, weapon signatures, communication intercepts, anything. His AI war modelers ran 4,000 simulated scenarios of what humanity might be planning. Not one of those 4,000 scenarios was correct, not even close, because none of them accounted for the fundamental thing that made humans different from every other species the Creth Dominion had ever conquered. Humans didn't just think with strategy, they thought with pain. And a human being, operating from a place of deep, personal, unresolved grief, does not follow any model, does not fit any simulation, does not behave in any way that a logical, calculated, militarily superior enemy can predict. Damon Vale was not planning a war. He was conducting one. And it already started 17 days ago, the moment he turned that screen off in the darkroom and made a phone call in a voice that sounded like fire. The ships the Creth Dominion were watching for were never coming. What was coming was already there, already inside their borders, already in their systems, already sitting across dinner tables from Creth commanders and allied planet governors and Dominion supply chain administrators, already listening, already mapping, already preparing. The galaxy was watching the front door. Damon had already come in through the window. There's a classified Earth military file that, even after the war ended, was never fully declassified. Most of it remained sealed, redacted, hidden behind authorization levels that 99% of humanity's own government cannot access. The few pages that were eventually released to the public had entire sections blacked out, not with digital censorship, but physically burned from the page, as if someone decided that even the shape of certain words was too dangerous to leave behind. That file was labeled Project Echo, and it was the most terrifying thing humanity had ever quietly built. It had started 7 years before Marcus's execution, back when Damon was still a general without a war, the kind of military mind that peacetime produces, and then has absolutely no idea what to do with. He had been assigned to a classified research division, nominally to oversee AI development for battlefield logistics. That was the cover story. What he was actually doing was building ghosts. The concept was simple in theory and nightmarish in practice. Take a volunteer, a human soldier, specially selected for psychological resilience, linguistic aptitude, and what the project files called emotional range. Then spend 3 years training them, not in combat, not in weapons, but in everything else. Language, culture, body language, negotiation, diplomacy, infiltration, the ability to walk into a room full of alien species who had never trusted a human, and within 40 minutes, make them feel like they had known you their entire lives. The ability, in short, to be Marcus Vale. Because that was the other thing Damon had done. The thing that, when the remaining War Council members first read it, made the room go completely cold. With Marcus's prior consent, given years before his death, during a quiet conversation between two brothers that no one else was present for, Damon had authorized a neural mapping of his brother's mind, his voice patterns, his micro-expressions, his specific diplomatic instincts, the way he tilted his head when he was listening, the precise tone he used when he wanted someone to feel genuinely heard, the almost imperceptible warmth that entered his eyes when he found common ground with someone he had just met. All of it captured, digitized, and distributed. Each Echo operative carried a fragment of Marcus Vale inside them, not enough to make them Marcus, but enough to make them feel like him to anyone they were talking to. A ghost of a memory, a shadow of a soul. The galaxy had watched Marcus Vale die. They didn't know he was already everywhere. There were 47 Echo operatives deployed across Creth Dominion space before Admiral Crane finished his mocking broadcast. 47 humans, moving through enemy territory not as soldiers, not as spies in any traditional sense, but as diplomats, traders, refugees, academics, wearing different faces, different names, different species identifiers in some cases, courtesy of Earth's most advanced biotech division, each one carrying a mission that had no combat objective whatsoever. Their only orders: listen, connect, and plant a single seed of doubt. One conversation at a time. One relationship at a time. One quiet question, asked at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right person, that made a Kreth ally stop and think for the first time in years. Do you serve a Dominion because you believe in it, or because you're afraid of what happens if you don't? That was it. That was the entire operation. No bombs. No assassinations. No fleet engagements. Just that one question, whispered into the ears of governors, supply commanders, allied species diplomats, and low-ranking Kreth officers who had never once been asked what they actually thought. And the answer, every single time, was the same: silence, followed by something that looked, just briefly, terrifyingly like realization. Damon sat in his command center and watched the reports come in. 47 small fires, each one burning quietly, invisibly, deep inside the structure of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at the star map, at the Kreth Dominion's territory, vast and bright and seemingly untouchable, and he saw what no one else could see yet: cracks, hairline fractures running through the foundation of an empire, placed there not by weapons, but by words, not by force, but by the one thing the Kreth Dominion had never once thought to build a defense against: human connection. Marcus had always said, the right conversation can stop any war. Damon had taken that belief and turned it into the opening move of one. And that was the moment the Kreth Dominion's fate was sealed. Not in a battle, not in an explosion, but in 47 quiet rooms across their own empire, where 47 humans asked a question that an entire civilization had forgotten how to answer. The ghosts were in the walls, and the walls were already beginning to crack. Empires don't fall like buildings. They don't collapse in one dramatic moment. One explosion, one battle, one decisive blow that sends everything crashing down at once. That's not how power structures die. That's the story empires tell about each other to make conquest feel clean and final. The truth is uglier, slower, more intimate. Empires fall like a body with internal bleeding. Everything looks fine on the outside. The flags still fly. The commanders still broadcast their confidence. The official channels still report strength and stability and absolute control. But inside, something is draining. Quietly, consistently, unstoppably. And by the time anyone on the outside can see the damage, it's already too late. The Kreth Dominion had been bleeding for 31 days before Admiral Crane's intelligence division even noticed something was wrong. It started on Veth Prime, a mid-tier supply world on Dominion's eastern expansion corridor, a planet that had been under Kreth control for 60 years. Compliant, productive, completely unremarkable in every strategic assessment ever written about it. Until the morning its governor stopped responding to Dominion communications, then stopped answering entirely. Then, 3 days later, broadcast a system-wide declaration of political separation from the Kreth Dominion, siding with a document called Systematic Exploitation, Cultural Erasure, and the recent unlawful execution of Earth's peace ambassador as evidence of Dominion that has abandoned all pretense of galactic law. The Dominion's response was immediate and brutal. A punitive fleet dispatched within hours, fully authorized to restore order by whatever means necessary. The fleet arrived at Veth Prime and found 17 other vessels already in orbit. Not Kreth vessels, not human vessels. Ships from 6 different species, 6 different civilizations that had, separately and apparently spontaneously, decided on the same day to position themselves as witnesses, as shields, as a message written in hull plating and weapons arrays that said, "We are watching, and we are no longer neutral." Admiral Crane recalled the punitive fleet. He did not sleep that night, because Veth Prime was not an isolated incident. It was the 4th. In 31 days, 4 different Dominion subject worlds had made similar moves, each one slightly different in its specific grievances, each one perfectly timed to maximize Dominion overextension, each one supported by a quietly growing coalition of species who had been, until very recently, perfectly content to look the other way. Crane's intelligence teams worked for 72 straight hours trying to find the organizing force behind the revolts. A human fleet coordinating the timing, a central communication hub, a command structure of some kind. They found nothing, because there was no central command. That was the genius of it. Each Echo operative had worked completely independently, planting their single seed, making their single connection, asking their single question, and then stepping back and letting the natural consequences unfold at their own pace. Damon hadn't organized a rebellion. He had simply reminded people that they were allowed to want one. The supply lines collapsed next, not through sabotage, not through any direct military action, simply because 3 of the Dominion's largest logistics contractors, alien corporations that had grown wealthy servicing Kreth expansion for decades, quietly declined to renew their contracts. No explanation given, no demands made, no negotiation attempted, just silence. The same silence Damon had used in response to Crane's broadcast. Return now, from a dozen different directions, by a dozen different actors who had all independently decided that the cost of Dominion Association had suddenly become higher than the benefit. The Kreth war machine, the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, began running low on fuel components within 6 weeks. And then Admiral Crane made his mistake. The mistake Damon had been waiting for. The one he had written about in the Veiled Doctrine, on a page titled, simply, The Provocation Response. The theory was this: a military commander who is powerful, proud, and suddenly confused will always, eventually, reach for the weapon they trust most. Not because it's the right move, but because it's the only move that makes them feel in control again. Crane, furious and humiliated and hemorrhaging influence by the day, turned his fleet toward Yalara, a small, neutral world with no military capacity and no political affiliation. A world that had done absolutely nothing to the Dominion, except one of its cities had recently given shelter to a group of displaced refugees from Veth Prime. Crane broadcast his justification live, called it a counterinsurgency operation, called Yalara a staging ground for anti-Dominion activity. The words were confident, official, carefully constructed. Nobody believed them. The galaxy watched a superpower raise its fist against a defenseless world, and in that single moment, every species that had been quietly sitting on the fence made their decision. Not because of anything Damon told them, not because of any human broadcast or diplomatic pressure or strategic communication, simply because they saw it with their own eyes, and it reminded them of every other time the Dominion had done exactly this, and they had looked away. Not this time. Within 48 hours of the Yalara broadcast, 11 independent civilizations filed formal condemnations with the Galactic High Council. The same council that had watched Marcus Vale's execution without a single objection now found itself suddenly, urgently, loudly vocal about Dominion conduct. Damon received the news in his command center. He read every condemnation filing, every single one. Then he looked up at his tactical officer and said 4 words: "Begin Stage 3. The Dominion had bled, the galaxy had turned, and somewhere on a neutral station at the edge of Kreth space, 47 ghosts who wore pieces of a dead man's soul smiled quietly and began packing their things. Their work was done. The next part of the plan required soldiers. There is a moment in every war where strategy ends and something raw takes over. Not chaos, not panic, something older than both of those things. Something that lives in the space between calculation and feeling, where a commander stops being a chess player and becomes something the enemy has no category for. Damon Vale reached that moment at 0400 hours, ship time, on the day he named the battle himself. His tactical officer had asked what to log it as in the official record. Standard protocol. Every major engagement needed a designation before commencement, a number, a coordinate reference, a neutral geographic identifier. Damon had looked at the star map for a long time, at the position of his fleet, 112 vessels, humanity's finest, every one of them crewed by people who had volunteered specifically for this engagement, knowing the odds, knowing the math, knowing that on paper, they had no business being here. Then he looked at the Kreth Dominion's assembled response force on the opposite side of that map. 940 warships, the largest single fleet deployment in Dominion history. Crane had decided, finally, completely, with the particular fury of a man who had watched his empire crack from the inside for 2 months, that he was going to end this, end humanity's involvement, end the question, end it all in one overwhelming, undeniable display of force that would remind the galaxy exactly who held power here. Damon looked at those 940 ships for a very long time. Then he said, "Log it as the Battle of Vale's Grief." Nobody in the room questioned it. The Kreth fleet arrived at the designated engagement coordinates, expecting a slaughter. What their sensors showed them instead stopped every commander on every bridge into momentary, confused silence. Humanity's fleet wasn't in a defensive formation. It wasn't in any formation their tactical AIs could identify or classify. The 112 human vessels were distributed across an area of space so vast, so irregular, with such seemingly random spacing and orientation, that the Dominion's war modeling system spent 4 full minutes simply trying to determine what they were looking at. Was it formation? A trap? A sensor ghost? A malfunction? It was none of those things. It was grief. Damon had not built a battle plan on logic. He had built on emotion, specifically on the particular, devastating, non-linear way that grief moves through a person, the way it strikes from unexpected directions, the way it doesn't follow rules or respond to reason, the way it overwhelms not through superior force, but through relentlessness, through the fact that it keeps coming and coming and coming, from angles you didn't prepare for, at moments you didn't anticipate, in forms you don't recognize until it's already inside your defenses. He had mapped his own grief, every wave of it, every direction it had hit him from in the 2 months since Marcus died, and he had translated it, movement by movement, into a fleet engagement model. His tactical AI had refused to validate it. Literally, The system had returned an error message stating that the proposed engagement pattern had no logical military foundation and could not be modeled for probable outcomes. Damon had looked at that error message for a long moment. Then he had smiled, for the first time since his brother died, and said quietly, "Good, that means they can't model it either." The battle lasted 11 hours. In the first hour, the Kreth fleet did exactly what 940 warships are supposed to do. They advanced. They fired. They hit targets. 14 human vessels were destroyed in the opening exchanges. Clinical eliminations by a military force operating at peak conventional efficiency. Crane watched from his command throne and felt, briefly, like himself again. Then the second hour began, and humanity's remaining fleet didn't retreat, didn't regroup into any recognizable defensive pattern. Individual vessels began moving in ways that looked, to every Dominion tactical system, like errors, like panic, irrational, uncoordinated flight responses. They weren't. Every movement was exactly where Damon needed it to be, not to win individual engagements, but to redirect Kreth attention, to pull specific vessels out of formation, to create gaps, not in the Dominion's armor, but in their coordination, an invisible web of communication and timing and mutual support that made 940 ships a fleet rather than just 940 individual weapons. Damon wasn't fighting their ships. He was fighting their cohesion. By hour 5, the Kreth fleet was still vastly superior in every measurable category, and completely confused. Their formation had been pulled into 7 separate engagement clusters, each one chasing a different piece of humanity's fleet, each one operating with slightly less coordination than before, each one making tactical decisions based on local conditions rather than unified command. Crane kept issuing orders. His commanders kept following them, but somewhere between the issuing and the following, there was a delay, a hesitation, a microsecond of uncertainty that hadn't been there in hour 1. Damon saw it on his tactical display, a pattern emerging in the Dominion response times, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 20 years studying how military machines fail. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. He opened a fleet-wide channel. His voice was completely calm. "All units, execute Grief Wave 4. You know what this costs. You volunteered anyway. Marcus would have called what you're about to do brave. I call it human. Move." There was no victory parade. Damon had forbidden IT and no fireworks, no celebrations, no champagne on flagships, no triumphant music broadcast across human channels. His officers had expected at minimum a formal ceremony, some public acknowledgement of what humanity had just accomplished against odds that every civilization in the galaxy had declared mathematically impossible. Damon issued one order instead. "Get me to the Galactic High Court Chamber. Today." The same chamber, the same floor, the same walls, the same cold, indifferent lighting that had illuminated his brother's final moments in front of 400 star systems. The same podium where the Kreth executor had read Marcus's sentence in that hollow, mechanical voice like a man announcing a weather forecast. Damon walked in alone and no honor guard, no military escort, no weapons visible, just a man in a general's uniform that still had the dust of battle on it. Because he had come directly from his flagship without changing, without sleeping, without eating, his staff had begged him to rest first, to prepare remarks, to let the diplomatic corps draft something appropriate for the moment. He had looked at them with those stone eyes and said, "I know what I need to say." The chamber was full. Every Galactic Council delegate, every species representative, every ambassador from every civilization that had watched Marcus die in this room and said nothing. They were all here now, some out of obligation, some out of guilt, some simply because they understood that whatever this human was about to say, history was going to remember it. The galaxy tuned in 400 star systems. The same audience that had watched an execution, now watching the man who had answered it. Damon stood at the podium. He looked out at the assembled faces, alien, varied, ancient, powerful, and he was quiet for a long moment, not from nerves, not from grief, from choice. He wanted the silence to land. He wanted every being in that room and every screen across the galaxy to sit inside the quiet for just a moment and remember what the last broadcast from this podium had been. Then he spoke. "My brother stood here and asked you for peace. You watched them kill him for it. I want to be very clear about something. I did not come here today to threaten you. I did not come here to declare human supremacy, or to demand reparations, or to redraw galactic borders in humanity's favor. I came here to finish what Marcus started." A murmur moved through the chamber. Confused, uncertain. This was not what anyone had expected from the man who had just dismantled the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Damon let the murmur settle. "My brother believed that every conflict has a conversation hiding inside it. He believed that if you found the right words, you could stop anything. He gave his entire life to that belief, and you let them execute him for it. So here's what I have learned from watching my brother die, and from everything that followed." He paused, And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, not weaker. Quieter the way deep water is quiet, the way something vast and immovable is quiet. Peace is not weakness. Peace is the hardest thing any civilization can choose. It requires more courage than any battle I have ever fought, more discipline than any military strategy one have ever written, more strength than anything I saw in 4 hours of combat against 9 times our numbers. Marcus was not weak. Marcus was the bravest person I have ever known, and the galaxy let him be killed because it confused his gentleness for fragility. We are not fragile. The chamber was absolutely still. Humanity will always send the diplomat first. We will always choose a conversation over the conflict, the treaty over the battle, the bridge over the weapon. That is not naivety. That is a choice. A deliberate, conscious, costly choice that we make every single time, because we know what the alternative looks like. We know because we have lived it. On our own planet, across our own history, in our own blood, humanity has been to the bottom of what we are capable of doing to each other. We have seen our own darkness up close, and we chose, collectively, painfully, imperfectly, to build something different. Do not ever mistake that choice for weakness again. He reached into his uniform pocket. He placed a single item on the podium. Marcus's ambassador badge, recovered from the execution chamber's evidence archive, still bearing the seal of Earth, still bearing his brother's name. This badge represents something that did not die in this room. It represents something that cannot be executed, cannot be dissolved, cannot be defeated by any fleet, any weapon, any empire, no matter how large. The belief that we can do better, that we must do better, that the galaxy we leave behind should be less cruel than the one we inherited. That was Marcus's belief. It is humanity's belief. And as of today, it is also our policy. He looked directly into the broadcast camera, directly into 400 star systems, directly into the eyes of every being watching on every screen across the known galaxy. We will always send the diplomat first. But now, the galaxy knows what we send second. He stepped back from the podium. He did not wait for applause. He did not look around the chamber for reactions. He picked up his brother's badge, placed it carefully back in his pocket, close to his chest, and walked out the same way he had walked in, alone, quiet, unbowed. The galaxy sat in silence for a long time after that. And in that silence, something shifted, something that had no official name, no treaty language, no formal declaration, something that simply settled into the fabric of galactic civilization, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward in every direction. The understanding that humanity was not what they had assumed, not the primitive, emotional, fragile newcomers they had cataloged and dismissed and ultimately underestimated in the most catastrophic way imaginable, but something older than their technology suggested, something deeper than their years in space implied, a species that had been forged in fire, repeatedly, across centuries of self-inflicted darkness, and had come out the other side still choosing light, still sending the diplomat first, still believing, against all evidence and all odds, that the right conversation could stop anything. And now, for the first time, backed by the absolute certainty that the conversation failed, they had a general named Damon Vale who would finish it. And that was the moment the galaxy finally understood what humans were: not a threat, not a weapon, not a conquest, but a warning, and a promise, both at the same time. Clap aboard the end.